It was a wild ride in tech this year. There were some significant ups and some significant downs. Was this a good year for computer tech or a bad year? Let's get into it. The year started out at CES with nVidia's launch of the Super series of GPUs. I predicted that nVidia was going to use the Super refresh to overtake their AMD Radeon competition and render AMD irrelevant. Well, I was half right. The Super series didn't overtake their competitors as the 4070 Ti Super refresh still trailed the 7900 XT, and the 4080 Super refresh trailed the 7900 XTX. But it didn't matter. It was close enough. All nVidia needed to do was get close enough, and their brand name and features carried it over the AMD GPUs for consideration. And that was good enough to boost sales and see nVidia's market share increase over AMD. nVidia also launched the new RTX 3050 6GB GPU for the entry-level market. The problem is, it's not a 3050. It not only has less memory, but it also has fewer shaders and lower clock speeds. Its performance is like an RX 580 or GTX 1060, while the original RTX 3050 8GB is like a GTX 1070. This new 6GB model is a whole tier lower of a GPU. It should not be labeled a 3050. It's clearly fraud. But while nVidia won't try to deceive the high end of the market, remember the 4080 12GB that they unlaunched? They are more than happy to screw people at the entry-level end of the market. Thanks nVidia for proving once again who you are at your core and for demonstrating that your persistence and drive to screw people over never ends. But AMD can only be happy, since if nVidia did not exhibit such horrible behavior and incite such hatred for these tactics, this world would not have enough nVidia haters that would buy up enough Radeon GPUs to keep them in business. But AMD did release the last significant CPU for the AM4 platform in the 5700X3D, and late in the year, it could be had for about $150 from AliExpress for a really good deal. Now, AMD launched two GPUs, starting with the RX 7600 XT, which is just an overclocked 7600 with 16GB of VRAM, and then they relaunched the 7900 GRE for the rest of the world, and they cut the price from $649 to $549. AMD attempted to fight back, but sales of the GRE never really took off, and now at the end of 2024 are discontinued. Kind of a flash in the pan. Also in February, we saw AMD launch new Ryzen 8000 APUs like the 8600G and 8700G, which, at the time, nobody really cared about because they were way too expensive at launch. It wasn't until later in the year that prices started to look really interesting. Now, back in March, we saw Intel's last stand with Raptor Lake and the launch of the i9-14900KS. This was the last of the Intel Core i series of CPUs. The Core i started in the first generation way back in November of 2008. And while it did not overtake the 7800X3D in gaming, the really impressive feature was this GPU went to 6.2 GHz and the massive amount of power it consumed. Also in the spring, Apple launched the M3 MacBook Air, completing the M3 lineup for updates. Apple would not bring the M3 family of chips to its desktop Mac lineup. Not for the Mac Mini and not for the Mac Studio. The M3 family was only for its laptops. Then in April and May, we would see the increase in the evidence for instability in the Intel 13th and 14th generation Raptor Lake CPUs. What was impressive about this was how Intel completely mishandled the issue as they tried to throw motherboard manufacturers under the bus and blame them. It took 6 months and several microcode updates before the final BIOS was released in September. That's when Intel claimed the issue was resolved and it was finally closed. But with the way Intel handled the issue, most people lost confidence in Intel CPUs, and Intel lost a lot of mindshare in the community. But while Intel was bumbling around with mishandling the instability and the vmin shift issue, AMD decided to overpromise the new Zen 5 processor performance at Computex in June, and then underdeliver in August, leading to the meme of Zen 5%. And if you thought Intel was incompetent in handling an issue, AMD said, hey, look at me, we can be just as incompetent too. It was clear that Zen 5 was launched earlier than originally intended, as the new X870E motherboards would not appear until September 30th, And Windows 11 was not planned to have the branch prediction optimizations until the second half of 2024 in the 24H2 release. They never should have launched Zen 5 early. Then in October, Intel launched the much anticipated Arrow Lake CPU in the Ultra 9 285K, and there was a high level of anticipation that Intel was going to leapfrog AMD like they did with the 12th gen and the 13th gen CPUs. But it was not to be. While the 285K does boast impressive productivity capabilities, showing the highest benchmark scores in Cinebench and Geekbench, for gamers, this launch was a regression. Intel's fastest gaming CPU is still its 14th gen Raptor Lake CPUs, and the Ultra 9 285K was a paper launch that was not seeing any availability since launch. And if the year ended there, you would say that 2024 was one of the worst years for desktop computer releases for CPUs and GPUs. I mean, Intel, AMD, and nVidia failed to deliver anything but disappointment. But then something strange happened in November. Apple started with the release of the new M4 series, and the CPU and GPU performance uplift was impressive. What was even better was the discount seen later that month on Black Friday sales, where you could pick up a base M4 Mac Mini for just $499. Even at the end of the year, I can get one for $499. That is an impressive CPU and GPU for that amount of money in a new small form factor computer. AMD then released the 9800X3D, and it showed impressive gains in testing with an RTX 4090 at 1080p resolution. And that CPU has been sold out everywhere and has been in constant demand. Finally, in December, Intel launched Battlemage in the Intel Arc B580. The reviews of this GPU show that it has better performance in most games than an RTX 4060 and an RX 7600, while selling for just $249. And it can also game at 1440p. This GPU got me so excited as it just reminded me of the value the RX 580 used to provide at that price point back in 2017. We haven't had anything this good in value since. So while most of the year was a disappointment, the last 2 months really added excitement and redeemed one of the worst years I can remember. You can bet that as I get my hands on these parts and test them, I'll be giving you my unique perspective and analysis on how they achieve the generational improvements and how they compare to each other. And looking into 2025, there should be more excitement at CES in January when nVidia announces the RTX 50 series, and AMD will announce RDNA 4 GPUs and the Ryzen 9 X3D CPUs. And then later in the year, the Apple M5 series of chips. I am looking forward to the new releases to see what performance uplift they can provide. Let me know in the comments below what you thought was the biggest disappointment in 2024, and what are you looking forward to in 2025? In closing out 2024, there was the passing of Gordon Ma-Ung, who lost his battle with cancer on the 21st of December. Gordon was an energetic individual who loved tech and would work tirelessly to provide the answers his audience wanted. If you do any research on hardware in the past, you inevitably will come across his articles and reviews. When I was researching the reason why GPUs were so expensive back in the fall of 2021, it was Gordon who asked the obvious question from none other than Jensen Huang himself. Among a whole room of people from the tech community, it was Gordon who had the guts to ask the question and force Jensen to answer. My condolences to his family. A GoFundMe has been set up if you'd like to help. Gordon's passion, candor, and sharp wit will be greatly missed. Rest in peace, Gordon.